So this chapter expands our scope compared to the last chapter. As mentioned, we were talking about the communicator last time, and that's our narrowest level of focus. And now we're expanding that out a little bit to talk about not just the communicator, but the message. So we're going to look at how messages are sent and or received. We're really not talking too much about direct conversation back and forth, more of how we're sending and receiving particular types of messages. Also, how we understand those messages, or even what is going on inside us that helps us generate those kinds of messages. So let's take a look. As is our pattern, we are going to be looking at a particular tradition, and within that tradition, in this case socio-psychological, we'll look at several different theories, and then we'll go to other traditions. And this socio-psychological tradition is, as a reminder, interested in how and why people choose their messages. It's all about that cause-effect dynamic. So what causes in my brain, what causes in my motivation, what causes in me are choosing me to select a particular message approach. And the other way is just as true. In other words, what is going on in me psychologically that is causing me to interpret messages in a certain way. So this socio-psychological area is really interested in the effectiveness of different types of messages and how people react. So that word effect is right in there. And we're looking at communicators' goals, our message designs, and the way we express ourselves. So here's this larger category, and within that we're going to look at some of the theories of messages. So one of them is compliance gaining strategies, sometimes just called compliance gaining, sometimes called compliance gaining strategies. And essentially there are a variety of messages that people use to get to do the things that they want. So the way you request, or the way you try to get other people to help you get what you want, really falls into about any one of 16 different approaches. They're listed in the textbook, so I'm not going to list them all here. But for example, you might promise somebody something. So if they do something, then you promise that you will do something in return. That's one of the ways that you get people to do things. Another one is that you might give them something ahead of time this is not a promise. You give them something ahead of time, and then what that does is it creates a sense of obligation in the other person to then help you get what you want. My favorite example of this is those little food samples they give out at stores. So you walk by and they give you out a little tiny sample of a particular food. Maybe it's a new thing they're trying to promote. And they don't tell you to buy it. They just give it to you. And if you're like me, I always feel like, well, if I like it and I taste it, then wow, maybe I should buy it. I feel a tiny sense of obligation. Now, I've talked to many people who they don't care. It doesn't bother them at all. If they tasted it and they liked it, they don't feel at all obligated. They just walk away. Hey, thanks for the free snack, and they walk away. And so there's no one right compliance gaining strategy that's going to work all the time, and that's why there are lots of different ones. The ones that I just mentioned, pre-giving, it's called, and promising, those are both pro-social. Another pro-social one, meaning positive one, is called liking. You just show that you like the person. Many salespeople, for example, use this approach. They act like they're your friend and they like you, and you know, it might not necessarily be genuine, of course, but let's just assume for the moment that it is genuine, and they show you that you like you, and then that makes you want to do business with them. It helps the salesperson get what they want. Those are pro-social. There are also anti-social compliance gaining approaches. For example, you might threaten somebody. You have to do this or else. And that's an anti-social one. In other words, that's a negative way to get someone else to do what you want. And maybe your parents, for example, use different approaches when you were younger, especially to get you to do the things that they want you to do, like to clean your room. And you might have different approaches. You know, let's just pretend for a minute you wanted something from your parents. Let's say you wanted money. Who would you ask? Your mom? your dad? How would you ask? My guess is that depending on who you talk to, maybe you want to borrow money from a friend, maybe it's not a parent. Depending on who you talk to, you might choose a slightly different strategy, a different approach, because you know what is most likely to work with that particular person. And so that's the idea behind compliance gaining strategies. It's not as if one size fits all. There are these 16 different ways to essentially try to get what you want, and you have to select. You have a goal of getting something you want, and you have to select the best strategy in your mind to get there. And maybe you try over time, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and you learn the best way to approach a person. I remember a student once said that she made the mistake of asking her mother for money because she said, oh, you know, I need new tires for my car. Could I have some money? And her mother just said, nope. And she thought, oh man, why did I ask my mother? What she should have done is ask her father. And what the student said is when she asks her father, she talks about things like, well, I just want to be safe on the roads, and I just, you know, I would hate for anything to happen. And she knows that if she uses a couple of these compliance gaining strategies on her dad, that she's absolutely going to get that money, even though her mother knows, yeah, I know what you're doing, you know. So these compliance gaining strategies can be pro-social or anti-social. That's on the face. However, if you get below the surface, of course, you could use these, even the ones that are labeled as pro-social, to manipulate. So this theory has a little bit of a gap in it in terms of ethics. Let's say you pick a pro-social one. You pretend that you like somebody. Well, that's liking. That's called liking. But pretending you like somebody to get something you want could be pretty manipulative in terms of maybe you're tricking the person. So this theory, I think, has a big weakness in terms of labeling them pro-social and anti-social, because that doesn't really get down to the reasons why they're choosing something. In the same way, you could threaten somebody, but it actually might be in their best interest. For example, I might say to my son, who is about to reach for an electrical socket with a pair of tweezers, if you do that one more time, I am going to punish you. Now that's the threat, but obviously I'm threatening him, perhaps because other kinds of warnings didn't work and other kinds of compliance gaining strategies didn't work. And so really what I want him to do is not get electrocuted, and so I might have to pull out that old-fashioned threat to protect his life. So compliance gaining strategies is a very socio-psychological theory because we're looking at causes and effects. What messages or causes will have the desired effects? Compliance gaining. It's also all about how I'm pursuing my goals. That's another reason it's under this tradition. How I'm pursuing my goals through my message designs. Politeness theory is really a fascinating area of research. Sometimes people don't even talk about the phrase politeness theory. They might just talk about face. But the idea behind politeness theory is that everybody has, universally, cultures all over the world have a notion of what politeness is. Now, it might look a little different in the US than it looks in Japan or it looks in Saudi Arabia. For example, certain things are rude here that would not be considered rude there, and so forth. But we all have a basic expectation for politeness within our own cultures. So in general, we like a little bit of eye contact. In the United States, for example, we like people to look at us in the eye, and if they're not looking us in the eye and they won't really talk directly, we might feel a sense of disrespect, like they don't really respect us enough. In other cultures, if you look directly in someone's eye, that could be shown as disrespect, right? You're not really respecting that authority. In the army, for example, in all the movies, you know, the new recruit comes in and the drill sergeant's screaming at him, and if they look right at the drill sergeant, they'll say, "Are you eyeballing me?" So eye contact is not necessarily universally valued as polite, but we all have a sense for how we prefer to be communicated with, and we want to be communicated with in polite and respectful ways. The concept that drives this is a concept called face, and that's the notion that we all have a desired self-image. We all see ourselves. We would like to see ourselves in a certain way, and we want other people around us to see us in that way as well. And so this face is a public kind of image. So we don't want to be embarrassed, or we don't want to be treated disrespectfully, particularly in front of others, or publicly. The word public doesn't necessarily mean in front of a whole huge crowd, but in front of others. We have a desired way that we want to be viewed by other people, and we want to be viewed by other people as we view ourselves in the best possible light. We have, therefore, face needs. In a conversation, we have specific kinds of face needs, and one of them, for example, might be that you want to be spoken to as if you are an intelligent person with some common sense, and so we generally don't like to be spoken down to, and that's a face need. Everybody has slightly different face needs because we all have a different desired self-image, but one of the ways that we see this coming up is how people ask us for things. They can ask us in a rude way or in a polite way. When people use positive politeness, this is a message strategy, positive politeness, they're going to emphasize how all the positive attributes of what we can offer and all the positive aspects. So I had a friend once ask me to look at an article he was writing, and he said, oh, you know so much about this area, and you're really, much more than I do, and so it would be just an honor to have you look at it since you have the expertise. And then that made his request, and requests can be slightly face-threatening, right? Because you put the person in a position where they might have to say no, and they want to be seen as a helpful, contributing team player. So it's hard sometimes for people to say no. You may have had trouble putting up that boundary and saying no. So positive politeness is one of the ways to address it. You elevate the person's self-concept, that desired self-image, and then they might be more likely to help you. Another one is negative face. Here's where you realize, for example, a request might be an imposition on them, on their time, on their energy. And so sometimes when we make a request, we say things like, oh, I know you're really busy, and if you can't do this, I totally understand, and feel free to say no. And so what we're doing there is we're making life a little easier for that person by giving them an out. We're being polite in the way we ask. We're not assuming. So a lot of times students approach me about letters of recommendation this way. Oh, I know you're super busy, and I know you probably write tons of these, but I was wondering, I'm applying to grad school, and could you, if possible, if you have time, feel free to say no, but could you write me a letter of recommendation? It's a interesting request, right? I mean, that's one of the ways. It's actually kind of nice when people say that, because then I get to write back oftentimes, oh, it's no problem, I'd be happy to. And then, see, I get to be the helpful person. I get to be a team player. And so they put me in a great position where I can have an easy out, because maybe I am busy, maybe I'm about to go on vacation and I can't make their deadline. Or I can help and show myself as a helpful person. So a face-threatening act, or an FTA, is one of those kinds of conversations where we communicate in a way with someone that actually might challenge or attack their face or threaten their face without, maybe they don't know it, but it could. For example, I had a friend of mine who assumed that my wife and I were both younger than my friend. And so she used to say to us, hey kids, and hey, how are you two, and hey kids. She used to use the word kids. And then she found out that my wife and I were both older than her. I was about 7 years older than her. My wife was a few years older than her. And she also realized that I was a professor at a college. And so the word kids, all of a sudden, she realized, oh, maybe I shouldn't talk down to them. I could have, and she, by the way, once she found that out, it's not like we were so important or anything, but certainly in that case, using the word kids is a little bit like talking down to someone, especially when you find out, wow, they're older than me, and they're, in society's standards, relatively established, so to speak. So she felt like, wow. So she didn't call us kids after that. She didn't say, hey kids. She was just like, hey, how's it going? And she dropped that. And I noticed that it might be face threatening. So maybe, for example, you ask, I had a really uncomfortable conversation with a friend of mine once. I said, hey, how's everything going with your girlfriend? Because I hadn't seen him in a while. And the last time I had seen him. He was with his girlfriend. They seemed to be getting along fine. And he said, well, actually, we broke up. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. That's horrible. And he said, yeah. And he seemed pretty bummed out. And I said, well, you know, I was trying to make him feel better. So that was face-threatening, right? Asking directly about that relationship when I didn't know the status of it. It ended up being face-threatening. And then I said, well, hey, you know what? It's her loss. And he said, well, actually, she dumped me. I really wish we were still together. And it seemed like no matter what I did, really just ground this guy into the ground. And I was trying to be helpful, but I just could not find the right words, and I couldn't shut my mouth. And that was fairly face-threatening. And here's a super face-threatening example. You bring up something that is very uncomfortable for the person, and you know it. Hey, I heard you got fired. Why? Why did they fire you? What, did you steal something? All right, that's a 10 out of 10 in terms of face-threatening. So you can get at different conversations and requests and other kinds of messages in much less face-threatening ways. But politeness is universal, and the concept of face, even though it's not particularly popular as a general term in the United States, that you're trying to save face, the term face is much more, or the concept of face is much more common in other parts of the world where we really do have a sense of that kind of honor and respect.